Rolling Shots edits right after the intro. Hey YouTube, how's it going? My name is Mo and I'm a car photographer from Bahrain. If it's your first time around this channel and you'd like to learn all about car photography, then go ahead and subscribe now so you don't miss out on all the cool stuff that I create every week. Now before I start, I'd like to note that I'm trying out this new setup. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Alright, so here's a hero image that we are going to work with, and this is kind of what it looks like straight out of the camera. Now I've done a bit of basic adjustments, and mainly I've lowered down the exposure about half a stop. And this is how it looks like after post-processing it in Photoshop. Now let me show you what was done in Photoshop. Alright, so now that we are in Photoshop, and if you've been following my workflow, the first thing that I would do is create an empty layer to clean up the photo. Now there isn't much really to clean in this image because it's pretty clean. But if you notice closely, I did have a bit of these cones that I actually removed, and I forgot to remove the shadows. But that's okay, I guess. I was pretty much excited. I wanted just to complete the edit. All right, so the next thing I did is actually I adjusted the yellows in this car, basically with a hue saturation layer, and I just targeted the yellows, and I increased the saturation on the yellows. And then I added the selective color and just slightly adjusted the tones of the yellows. I don't know if this is something that you can see on your screen, but it's very subtle and just a bit of adjustment to the yellows. All right, and after that, I actually added a dodge and burn layer. And as you can see closely, I've dodged around the car, the sun rays, the parts of the car. If you look closely over here and there. Now, if you're not familiar with dodge and burn, I have a video explaining how to dodge and burn in Adobe Photoshop, and I'll leave a link to it in the description below. All right, so moving onwards, I added a camera raw filter. Let me open that up. So here are the adjustments that I made in the camera raw filter. I basically warmed up the photo using the temperature slider, and then I added a bit of tonal contrast, about 43, and a vibrance of 13. The idea was here, and I know that I don't usually do that. I went against everything that I usually do in my workflow, but this time I said I needed more tonal contrast and I needed that vibrance in the image. All right, so moving onwards, the next thing I did is I added an empty layer, and I'll show you this trick. You're gonna like that. If you look closely, just right there, you see these white highlights? These were just brush strokes, very subtle. I basically selected this area with the pen tool, and I basically used a very soft brush and brushed this area. I think I had the flow maybe at 29 or even less, just to give that bit of highlight on that area. Now it's a very simple trick, but it adds up a lot to the image. Here you go, you learned something new. All right, so the last thing that I did in Photoshop is I just boosted the sun flare. Does that make sense? And I believe that I've showed you previously how it's done, but I can't recall if I did. So let me show you quickly how it is done. So I'll grab a new brush on a new layer, and just going to increase the flow and the opacity to 100%. Now I'm going to just stroke once, like so. And I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to transform this. Make it a bit bigger, like so. Now I'm going to add a hue and saturation layer, and I'm going to lock it down to the layer below it. You can do so by holding Alt and then click between the two layers. All right, now what I'm going to do is change the blending mode of this to, I believe it was a soft light. I'm going to go back to the hue and saturation, click colorize, increase the saturation. Now bring down the lightness, and there you go, you got a flare somewhere there. Okay, now what you need to do is adjust the sun flare to your liking, and let's just readjust that, just so it fits the scene properly. Somewhere around there. Okay. Now I'm going to add them all in one layer or a group, and then I'm going to move it around. So if you want to have it here, like so, you can do that. And I think the opacity of the first stroke could go down a bit. There you go. And that's it. And that's how I created the flares. All right, and that's it for Photoshop. Now I took it back to Lightroom to add my final adjustments, and I'm going to walk you through that as well. All right, now we're back in Lightroom. Here's what I've done so far. I crushed the blacks a bit, just a tad, just to give it that contrast. I just wanted a very contrasty image. And I boosted the clarity again, so it was around there, and I thought like this image could perhaps take more clarity, and I think it's a little bit too much. I think I went out of my comfort zone and went against everything that I used to do and boosted the tonal contrast and the saturation in this image. Now I did a bit of color grading using the split toning, and I basically chose a color for the highlights, which is this hue. And then I used another one for the shadows, which is kind of bluish. So that's kind of the orange and teal grading. And you can do that as well with LUTs or within Photoshop. And the final thing that I did is I added a bit of sharpening because I did not sharpen that photo in Photoshop. Again, I can do it in Photoshop, but I kind of chose to do it in Lightroom. And that's it for this edit, YouTube. All right, before just ending this video, I thought of walking you through the RS3 elements shot. So once again, I'm in Photoshop, and the first thing I do is clean up the photo. And I cleaned it using the clone stamp tool. And if you don't know how to use it, I'll leave a link to one of the tutorials in the description below. So I cleaned up the photo. I just removed these because they were too distracting. And then I again did a dodge and burn layer. That's one for the car. And if you look closely, I dodged the areas around the car, which are, I wanted to basically emphasize and pop out. And then I felt I could have dodged and burned even further. So I duplicated the layer and just showed more of the details, really. It's just another duplicate of the layer below it. The only thing that I added is I burned the shadows just to bring that up. All right, so the next thing I did, I looked at the photo and I was like, the sky is very dull. It could use some nice cool sky. So I replaced the sky with this one and it changed the image entirely. Now, if you want to know how I did that, I'll leave a link to a video in the description below. All right, so I brought in the sky and I thought it was a bit too saturated for what it is. So I added a hue saturation layer and kind of just dropped down the saturation and locked it down to the sky layer. And of course, then the last thing I did, I added a camera raw filter similar to the one that we did with the R8, and then moved it back to Lightroom and did exactly the same thing that we did with the R8. And that brings us to the end of this video, YouTube. Now, if you have any questions, please leave me a comment in the comment section below. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you actually want to know how I actually shot these photos, I'll leave a link to the video in the description below. All right, YouTube, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.